Okay, so let's look at our final piece to emotion. All right, over here. Why are we not? There we go. Reason is always and everywhere the slave of the passions. David Hume, also one of my favorite philosophers. Okay, so we're going to start with looking at something psychological. Maybe some of you have seen this before, called Maslow's Hierarchy of Needs. This is a diagram that basically someone named Abraham Maslow in the 50s attempted to synthesize a bunch of research related to human motivation. And basically, he tried to bring together a bunch of disciplines: biology, psychology, achievement, sociology, and different things, and create sort of a hierarchy of human needs based on two groups: deficiency and growth. Okay, with the deficiency needs, each lower need must be met before moving to the higher need. Okay, so when you've satisfied one of your needs, at a future time, a deficiency will then be detected, and the individual will try to remove the deficiency. This will make more sense as you look at this is what it looks like, okay? So this is the hierarchy of needs according to Abraham Maslow, okay? That we have psychological needs, safety needs, belonging needs, esteem needs, and self-actualization needs, okay? So basically, these are very basic psychological needs at the bottom, right? Breathing is a need. If we don't do it, it has to be met, right? Food, etc. So those are very basic needs. From there, he'd say we build on those needs to have safety needs. So once we've met our basic physiological needs, we move to safety needs, right? You need to be secure. You need to feel safe. You need to kind of have a job or a way to sustain yourself. You need to have kind of a basic sense of morality, a basic sense of family, a basic sense of health, and a basic sense of sort of property, like I want my stuff kind of thing. From here, you move up into the love and belonging needs, according to him, which is sort of friendship needs, family needs, relationship needs, sexual needs, etc. Okay? From there, you move up to esteem needs. So once you've established this need, then you can move up to self-esteem, confidence, achievement, respect of others, right? These are the kind of things you want to achieve at that level, up to the highest level, which is the self-actualization level, which is, again, very high sort of psychological needs of morality and creativity. So in other words, you can do this stuff, you can meet these needs if you've met the needs below, okay? If a deficiency happens, you have to go and address that particular need. This is his proposal in what's called Maslow's Hierarchy of Needs. The latest version of this is often going around as an internet meme, so I'm just going to show you what I mean by that. Hopefully it comes up. I didn't pre-test this, but so I'm just going to bring that up as an image search. And where is it? Oh, I'm surprised it isn't in there. You can see there, a lot of people have drawn it in different ways, but it is essentially the same general structure. But man, I thought for sure this would work. All right, let me just tell you. The latest version of this that I've seen on the internet is there's a level below this one, and it just has Wi-Fi written there as the most needed sort of, that's sort of the modern version of the hierarchy of needs. All right, so according to Maslow, an individual is ready to act upon the growth of the needs only if the deficiency needs are met. So Maslow's hierarchy can be used to describe the kinds of information that an individual seeks at different levels. So for example, at the low level, we're seeking coping information to meet basic needs. So to meet basic needs of the hierarchy here, we need to deal with those. And at the safety level, right here, we need help sort of assisting how to feel safe. So once we've dealt with one basic level, we can move to the next level. But when a deficiency happens, we have to address it. Okay, so this is just a structure. It's a way to think of emotional versus other types of needs. So you can certainly research this in way, way, way more detail, but it's kind of something to sort of plot some basic emotional needs and things, how they can be developed, right? So psychologists have used this kind of model as a way to address patients in some sort of a basic way. People in the growth level of cognitive and aesthetic needs will certainly be addressing different types of needs than needs down here. So a psychologist can't really address these needs, right? Because a psychologist, other than handing you a sandwich, that's too basic of a need. But a psychologist maybe can address these higher level needs when they have a discussion with someone. Or if you're acting as a counselor to one of your friends and you're trying to figure out why is this friend upset, you could maybe use this as a bit of a model to just say, well, are you hungry? Or did you get enough sleep? Once those are kind of addressed, then you go, well, you know, what's the matter? Are you scared? Is something wrong? Did someone take your stuff? Then you move to the next level, right? Well, what's the matter? Did you break up with your boyfriend, right? Did you have a fight with your father? And then you can kind of move up from there. Well, you know, now you're kind of at this level where you're addressing things at a different level. You're kind of saying to them things like, well, do you feel disrespected? Did someone disrespect you, right? Why are you not feeling confident in yourself? Again, you've moved up to a whole other level than down here. And that's kind of, again, giving a bit of a structure to addressing emotions at different levels as to how they're responding. So I think it's a neat model that I just wanted to introduce to you guys. It's actually just something that I just thought would be something to just introduce to you guys as a neat way to look, especially because beyond high school, some of you maybe study fields that are not available in high school, like psychology and sociology, and these kinds of things come up. That's a John Lennon quote. Okay, so let's tie emotions to the logical fallacies that we studied back in our reason unit. We have a lot of reason to distrust emotion, okay? And it definitely could be, as we've seen before, a way to contradict reason. But when you, for example, are making decisions for large social groups, emotion should be part of that conversation. Imagine if it wasn't, right? Imagine that when you were discussing important, like say you were a policymaker, say you were in government, and you were making decisions about education, about unemployment, about childcare, and you completely took emotion out of your decision making. It was based purely on reason. Would that be making the best decisions? I would argue that it wouldn't be. That you would be making them like, well, we're going to cut all these childcare spots because we need money to fix the roads. Without taking into account the emotion behind the decision you're making might in fact be not the best decision, okay? So we kind of need emotion often in decision making, right? But how should we bring emotion into the decision process? Into combining it with reason, okay? So is it part of the subject matter under discussion, right? For example, do you just make people feel secure? Do you raise happy children? Do you fix depression? Is that how we bring emotion in? Is it part of the process of decision making, right? Is it a way you justify your decisions? Well, I feel good about my decision, so I think I've done it right, okay? Is it a kind of a diversion tactic? Do you use it to sort of use emotion to kind of get what you want through the process? Is it just part of the style of the way you communicate? We saw that in our activity this morning. Is emotion just something that we just have as part of our communication style? How do we bring emotion and reason together? If you use good critical thinking skills, you should know that emotion should not be just thrown aside in the decision-making process. That you have to bring emotion into the decision process, but how you do it is really important. And at the same time, as you're bringing reason and logic into the discussion, you're going to watch out for things like logical fallacies, right? So we should be on guard against the use of emotion to persuade us to conclusions that contradict our logic, okay? We know emotion is a strong persuader, right? If you use tears when you're asking, if you appeal to emotion, you're going to get often results that you were hoping for. So we use emotion as a persuader. As well, oops, sorry, just want to jump back here. This taps into our desires, right? I mean, some of our deepest desires are very much related to emotion. So this can also connect to fallacies, right? So for example, one of the direct fallacies in appeal to pity is just that. If an embezzler is caught stealing money red-handed, he might just start crying and saying that he's dying and that maybe his wife is dying, and he makes that appeal to pity directly. That's a direct fallacy that's directly appealing just to emotion as a persuader. But the thing is, it's not a fallacy if the pity is justified. It's entirely possible that he is dying and that maybe he just stole an apple from like a street vendor because he's literally starving to death. That pity could be very well justified. And if it's justified, then it's not a fallacy. It's an actual thing we should consider. How we determine whether it's a fallacy or if it's something that we should actually take into consideration is incredibly individualistic. I can't say that this is the rule. None of us can say that. That's why we study these things from a sort of perspective in that way, is to come up with good sort of strong decision and critical thinking skills. And most often that comes down to some sort of justification or proof to kind of make it, if this happens, we would ask the embezzler to prove it. Prove that you're dying, right? Which leads us all the way back to the beginning of the course. The formula for knowledge was justified true belief, okay? So again, if you think of it this way, he's either dying or he's not. Well, actually, we all are, so that's a true statement. But let's say he says, I have pancreatic cancer. He either has that or he doesn't. That's a truth statement, okay? What we believe about what he says will be a factor of whether he can prove it to us or not. And some of that proof will be just through reason. He may not necessarily show us the lab reports that says I have pancreatic cancer, but when he's trying to prove whether it's true to us or not, he's going to appeal to our emotions. And we have to balance that. We have to say, well, maybe he's just trying to create a fallacy here to get away with the fact that he stole something. We have to judge that, and in judging that, we basically go to how do you justify this? So again, in that formula, knowledge equals justified true belief. In my opinion, the justified part is the most important part. Okay. Other fallacies, direct appeal to anxiety or fear, okay? That primitive fight or flight reflex that we all have ultimately can lead us to fallacious reasoning, okay? The fact is we want to survive. That's built into our DNA. So if you appeal to that, the fear of dying, it will ultimately affect us in some way. We can't not be affected that way. And through that emotional self-protection mechanism, it has driven a lot of decision making. And this can be happened at an individual level, or as it says here, at an entire sort of cultural level, where countries talk about other countries and the threat of us versus them will appeal to the emotional state of the population of that culture. Now again, this may not be a fallacy. There might in fact be a real justified fear here of something happening. How we justify it is again part of our critical thinking skills. But we know that emotion is part of the equation. To think that it's not would be an error on our part. The appeal to belonging. Now this goes the opposite of fear. This is our human desire to belong, which again, if we go back to the Maslows Hierarchy of Needs, is a very basic need. We need to feel belonging. We are social animals. Advertisers appeal to this all the time. They tap into that by creating things like brand loyalty. Like, you should buy this product. This is a good product. That isn't necessarily a fallacy if it can be justified. This also appears in cultural language, right? We Americans, we Canadians. As Canadians, we often love to trash the Americans. The Americans love to express themselves as the best country in the world. This is part of that emotive language. That's part of their cultural heritage that is built on an emotional base, okay? And again, this can also apply to other things like class or caste or religion or nationality or even sports teams. That appeal to belonging is built right in there. That, hey, you're not a Jets fan, get out of here, right? Like that kind of stuff at an emotional level is very basic, okay? And again, whether it is a fallacy or not is a matter of a judgment based on evidence and proof. I don't want to be at the mercy of my emotions. I want to use them to enjoy them and to dominate them. Okay, that's from The Picture of Dorian Gray, a book by Oscar Wilde. Actually, a play, I believe. So, can I teach you guys empathy? Can you teach empathy? So, empathy, the ability to feel what somebody else is feeling, which was part of our activity this morning. Could you guys judge that emotion? Can we teach that? Can you learn how to do that better? So that's the question I want to kind of address right now. In education systems, in cultural systems, we treat emotion like as if that is something we can do. Like, I can teach you that. That's kind of the accepted norm, is that yes, I can teach you to read emotion. We treat it as if it's shaped, like we can shape emotion, that ideas like this is right, this is wrong, this is a good thing, this is a bad thing. That these ideas of morality and ethics are some things that we can kind of teach. I mean, we have a social justice group in this building that kind of, we assume, is operating under this kind of a structure. We kind of build that structure assuming that, yes, emotion can be taught. And that we can direct emotions. It's like, oh, well, you might be a bad person, but I can show you how to be a good person. That I can actually do that. Here's a quote from the Dalai Lama. I believe that happiness can be achieved through training the mind. When I say training the mind in this context, I'm not referring to the mind merely as one's cognitive ability or intellect. Rather, I'm using the term in the sense of the Tibetan word sem, which has a much broader meaning, which is closer to psyche. Okay? And again, if you study psychology, they have these ideas of the self, right? And what does that mean? Philosophical debates of mind versus brain, right? Are they the same thing? Are they different things? And if we tack emotion into that, is emotion something that we can in fact control? Was one of the first basic statements I said back in part 1. We talked about the psychological and the physiological effects of emotion, but can emotion actually be something that can be taught? In your actual IB learner profile, it describes the perfect IB learner as a caring person, which is an emotional statement, right? It frames that in this is directly from that IB profile. The IB learners strive to be caring. They show empathy, compassion, and respect towards the needs and feelings of others. So the IB, an international education organization, has targeted this as a goal. If you actually read our school's mission statement, how many of you know it off by heart? Say it right now. I knew the answer was going to be none of you. No. Impressive. You actually do know this. I'm very happy that. Because I would probably have gotten it wrong. So you guys are better than me. Well, in many ways. But and again, notice that appeal to emotion. Like, that's something the educational system strives for, is to shape emotion. It seems like a goal. Now, is it a byproduct of the actual education going on? Or is it something that teachers directly feel that they can do? And can it even be done? Can we actually change emotional states in that way? It's definitely a philosophical debate there. If the goal is empathy, to be able to feel what other people can feel, very much like this morning's activity, that we can see it through their eyes or feel it with their feelings or essentially imagine that we're in their shoes, okay? It demands that the belief in an equal value of the other person. So if you're going to be able to empathize with that other person, you're going to need to actually understand that other person and respect that other person. And have a value of compassion for that other person. If you dislike that other person and try to empathize with them, you might be getting misread emotions there. So just the fact that you're trying to empathize with someone demands respect and compassion, I would argue. So if empathy is significant, okay, and we use it as a starting point for ethics. So in order to make ethical judgments, like this is a good thing or this is a bad thing, we need empathy, then yeah, empathy is super important to us, okay? That if we understand how others think and feel and how they would react emotionally to the same situation as us, that's super, super important for constructing things like systems of economics, systems of government. Now, how can we get this knowledge? How can we find out what they're actually feeling? Maybe we can look back in human history. Maybe we can study things like human sciences, like psychology and sociology. Maybe the study of those, maybe ethics as a study will help us to build that strong sense of empathy. The question is, are you studying that stuff? Yeah, some of it. I mean, you're certainly studying history, right? Psychology isn't a mandatory course in high school. Sociology isn't a mandatory course in high school. Okay? Maybe history isn't the right word. It wasn't called history when you were in grade 9. It was called what? Social studies, right? Think about what those two words mean. Study, education. Social, what does that imply? Social implies a group of people, right? Yet, as you moved on, what are you guys taking now? You're probably taking a course in history. It doesn't really, it's sort of a different structure to it now in some ways, okay? Many actions that people have gone very badly, even though the action was intended well, because they had initial ill-informed information. And they were trying to empathize in a way that they thought was going to be good, but it actually turned out to be bad. I don't think it's going to take you guys long, but I'm going to still ask the question, can you think of an example of this in history? Where people thought they were doing the right thing because this is what the people that they were affecting would want. So they were trying to empathize with that person, but in the end it turned out really badly. The bombing of Hiroshima. Well, do you think they actually thought this will be good for them? I don't know if that's quite, that was more of a war action. Good for the world, okay. If the war ended, right? Anyone have another example? How about residential schools? Is that the one you're going to say? What's the history behind residential schools in Canada and Manitoba specifically? What was the point of that? Why did that happen? To educate the Aboriginals, right? Inject the culture in there. They thought this is what they want, that they're kind of impoverished. This is what they need. And so the people doing that had a good intention. We're going to help these Aboriginal people. But in the end, it turned out the opposite. It wasn't helpful at all to them in the history there. That's the case where we're using empathy as a starting point. Trying to empathize with somebody else was super, super important, but they misread it at that level. Alex, you had something to say about that? Yeah. I think if you think about it, depending on your knowledge of history, you can probably pull this up various places, even perhaps in your own experience. Something that you had a friend and you thought, oh, I bet you my friend's really upset. And you did stuff that, I can tell you this as a married man, this happens to me all the time. I think my wife is emotion X. I do action Y to try to fix emotion X. Really, she was feeling emotion Z, and action Y has made worse emotion Z. Fill in your blanks there, whatever you want. I think this is happening all the time. But the problem was at this level. I was trying to empathize with that other person, and I misread that. I misread the emotional state of that person. Based on the emotional state that I thought that person was in, I constructed my actions, it was the starting point for my actions, ethical and otherwise, that resulted in a misreading. So yeah, I think that's super important. Empathy as a starting point drives so many of our actions. Yes? Absolutely. Now, if we think of this, if we try to pull this away from sort of the human sciences, like right now we're talking about history and sociology and psychology, and you think, well, this won't be a big deal if I think about things like physics and chemistry and stuff like that, right? But think about what an actual chemist does in their daily life, beyond learning chemistry. So now you're an actual chemist working for a company, okay? What are you going to be doing in your daily life? What would a chemist be doing? Okay, experiments then, right? Experiments on what? Chemicals? Let's say they work for a shampoo company, chemistry. Okay, and they're going to make some cool new shampoo, right? Which, by the way, I have problems with the word shampoo. It's like fake poo. So this is anyways. And we put it on our heads. What's wrong with us? So let's say they have to do an experiment, and they build a shampoo, and they want to see how it's going to react to hair. How do they do that? Can you imagine, for those of you who studied chemistry, how they would go about doing that? Like, would they bring in somebody and say, hey, let me test the shampoo on your head? Is that how the first step, do you think? What do you think they would do? On an animal, right? Maybe they tested on an animal. Yeah. Okay. So let's say the animal reacts to that. And we can't sense any hair damage, but it seems like the animal is reacting to this in a way that's emotional. How do we judge that, right? How do we measure that? We talked about that back in part 1. Do we assume the animal is reacting in a negative emotion, like, say, fear or anger or upset? Or is it a happy emotion that the animal's feeling? Well, then we extrapolate that onto humans, and then we start human testing, and we're getting different results. Again, it's that empathetic starting point that really kind of drives even hard sciences like that. Even natural sciences have that component. It is there. It is a part of even studies at that level. I would agree, it's a lesser point when we sort of retract away from the human sciences, but ultimately it's going to get to that level that we cannot remove emotion from the discussion. All right, that was a great discussion today, everybody. I'm going to wrap that up, and I have one